For 10 years now, American diplomats, officials, and intelligence officers around the world have been encountering mysterious incidents known as the Havana Syndrome. This is like a paralyzing blow from some invisible force that makes them invalids for life. They are unable to concentrate, lose their balance on flat ground, and suffer from terrible migraines. Cause of this effect is unknown. However, investigative journalists confirm timing and locations of attacks inexplicably matched with arrival of GRU officers from Military Unit 29155.
We paid attention to this topic somewhere 3 years ago, and Christ and I were thinking about investigating something in this area, even when I lived in Moscow in the 21st year. And it was clear that even when the first messages came, there was an article by Yulia Yurievna, for example. It was clear that this was very similar to the Russian trace, because many people, including those associated with working in the Russian direction, suffered, and it all did not look like a coincidence. However, it proved challenging for us to acquiesce to this request, primarily due to the fact that we require the contact information of individuals who have been impacted. This is necessary to eliminate instances where seemingly peculiar and verified symptoms have manifested in individuals who may have experienced unrelated side effects stemming from depression, for instance. That is, if there were more than 1,000 appeals in total, then we believe that there were 100+ real attacks. Otherwise, there may have been even fewer, several dozen, but there were about 100 people affected. In accordance with this, there exist numerous cases among them wherein medical evidence has been provided, where analyses have been conducted, and where we have absolutely no doubt that it is unequivocally Groven syndrome, without any room for uncertainty or ambiguity. And only subsequent to commencing our collaboration on this particular subject with the CBS program 60 Minutes 1 year ago, we were able to actually gain access to these individuals and engage in conversations with them. And at some point, when we had already identified the suspects, the same GRU 29155 group, we showed photos to 2 victims who said they had seen suspicious individuals. So, one victim in 2014 in Frankfurt saw that some person was rubbing against the embassy, that he was taking pictures of something, and let him talk. And by the way, he spoke with a strange accent, which he also noticed he remembered them. In the second case, in Tbilisi in 2021 during the attack, the victim, who was the diplomat's wife, looked out the window and saw a man trying to improve himself in this ordinary desert, which looked quite unusual in Tbilisi, at least until the 21st year before this wave with immigrants began. So there was a tall, slim, blonde guy who usually wasn't there, and in both cases we started showing photos that were suitable for the members of 29155, and it was determined that in both cases, the victims unequivocally recognized and acknowledged that it was indeed the identical person who approached them at that specific point in time. And in a single instance, it was Yegor Gordienko, a colonel who had been a defendant in our articles for a considerable period of time. In the second case, the son of General Albert Averyanov, a young student, who also at some point began to be involved in this activity, we see from the calls and flights that he is constantly communicating with members of the parents' Thai 5. And in both instances, the victim stated that we have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that this person looks incredibly similar to the one we saw back then, without a shadow of a doubt.
As it turned out, we are talking about the same group of GRU employees who have already been involved in the poisoning of Skripals and entrepreneur Emilian Gebrev.
Out of all the individuals we have identified, the sole addition is Albert Averyanov. The reason for his inclusion is his youth, as he had not previously attracted our attention during past investigations. All other defendants were either involved in the poisoning of Skripal or in the poisoning of Emilian Gebrev. Here's Mishkin, with Chapiga, as everyone remembers, took part in the poisoning of Skripal. All of the others whom we meet further, they all took part in 2 poisonings, including Emelian Nagibriev, who was also in Bulgaria. So it is actually a very small team. At least it was at that time, from the year 2014 to the year 2021, spanning a period of 7 years. Why did Mishkin ultimately end up in that location, for instance? Because a portion of this group consists of individuals who have graduated from the Military Medical Academy, meaning they are both GRU officers and have a medical education. This is needed for poisoning. This is needed for all those actions where you want to harm health. It's great to have someone on the team who knows what they're doing. Here is Mishkin, one of such people.
Reporters were able to locate official documents in which group members provide information on the development of military weapons.
It's funny that the GRU burned their accounting, or rather not their own, but the accounting of the presidential administration, because Terentiev and Yezhov, after forced resign following our investigation of Skripal and Gebrev, we burned them, taken into the presidential administration with powers of the Far East, powers of the president in Far Eastern districts. And they needed to submit to the presidential administration all the documentation about where they were spending all the state money before that, to report in short to the anti-corruption committee. They reported, committee tells him, no, please provide more detail. What did you spend these 100,000 rubles on? Well, we have completed some kind of individual task. And what was the task? What were you doing? Please provide me with the information. It was mandatory for them to declare the topic of their work. And if my memory serves me right, the topic of their work was the study of acoustic weapons in the conditions of urban warfare, specifically focusing on combat operations in the city environment. It is not at all a fact that in the first place it was truly a study, and it was not merely a money grab. Perhaps the weapon mentioned here has nothing to do with what they used, but it is still a very interesting coincidence that exactly those people who, as we suspect, used wave weapons in attacks on diplomats had an official document in which they were engaged in the development of such weapons.
Havana Syndrome, which was diagnosed in the victims, is a fairly rare and poorly studied phenomenon. However, as it turned out, it is actively studied by the Kirov Military Medical Academy, whose professor is the same GRU doctor, Sergei Chapur.
We possess knowledge that Sergei Chapur is not just a specialist in cholinesterase inhibitors, that is, specifically in a beginner, but also that he has scientific publications regarding the effects of radiation on the brain. Generally, this institute of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the GNII, a scientific military institute which he heads, were highly and actively involved in various types of brain effects, playing a significant role in studying and researching them. Well, naturally, just like that, in order to have instructions for utilizing a weapon that leads to the occurrence of Havana Syndrome, which we have not witnessed, but nevertheless, this minor syndrome is precisely what numerous individuals who have experienced Havana Syndrome have been diagnosed with, even though we haven't seen any instructions for using the weapon that causes Havana Syndrome. And this is a rare occurrence solely based on the theory of probability, so that it aligns so that the GRU operatives happen to randomly develop an interest in this topic. Well, it appears to me that this is simply unbelievable, because the minor syndrome itself is unrelated to the military theme. Why on earth are GRU doctors suddenly involved in this story?
You know, this is not a new topic. For many years, the topic of the so-called Bablavansky syndrome has been discussed in the press, and most often from the beginning it was somehow linked to accusations against the Russian side. However, up to this point, no one has ever published or expressed any convincing evidence for these unsubstantiated accusations in any location whatsoever. Therefore, all this is nothing more than groundless verbal accusation.
Insider journalists continue to work and tell the truth. Support our channel, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. This will aid in spreading this video. If you have personally witnessed significant events, please send us your photos and videos to the black box.